Good evening. I'm Robert Barry Fleming. I'm the Executive Artistic Director at Actors Theater of Louisville. We are so thrilled that you could join us for this Animators panel sponsored by UPS. We're so grateful for our sponsor who's made this possible to share this with the public and 60 students from the Jefferson County Public School System. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to introduce this extraordinary panel, their work. We'll get a chance to see snippets of the work and trailers and talk about these gentlemen's extraordinary journey, how they arrived at doing the work that they do. I'm going to start with Christopher Gerson there to the left of my screen, who is the creator of the yellow wallpaper. And he is an actor. He is a filmmaker with 20 plus years of cinematography experience. Thrilled to have Christopher here. Welcome, Christopher.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
We've got Alex Coulombe to my right. He is an XR designer, an extraordinary developer and leader and visionary in this field. Alex is working on A Christmas Carol with Actors Theater of Louisville. Welcome, Alex.
Thanks so much, Robert.
I'd like to introduce Andy Perez down there in my right corner. Andy is a visual artist and a graphic designer of many extraordinary companies, and his work is very distinctive and inspiring. His contribution in collaboration with us is the Ali Summit. Welcome, Andy.
Thank you, Robert. Glad to be here.
We've got Yehuda Jai husband right there below me. Yehuda is an extraordinary animator. He's an actor himself, and has created some extraordinary work with the breast of Tiresias that we'll get a snapshot of. Welcome, Yehuda.
Thank you, Robert. Good to be here.
And last but not least, Nick Choksi. He is an extraordinary actor, animator, a musician. His work on When I Read My Daughter, Rudyard Kipling, has just been so inspired. We're thrilled to have Monik here with us. Monik, welcome.
Thank you. So nice to be here.
So the first question I just want to throw out to the whole group is, how did you come to animation, and what does it have to do with any collaboration you might have in theater prior to this? So Chris, can I start with you?
Yeah, how I came to animation is, I guess, a long story in that it started quite a while back when I attempted many years ago when I was working for the Sundance Film Festival. I was trying to figure out how to do cell-shaded animations. And at the time, it was just an extremely difficult process. And I was able to do it in small bursts in little tiny ways. Essentially, I had to paint every frame of the film. And I wasn't a very good painter, and so it was really a matter of throwing it into Photoshop so I managed to get little bits and pieces. Anyway, I gave up because I got that project done, but I gave up on doing it sort of long term because it was so incredibly time intensive and hard for me because the technology just hadn't caught up with me. Unless you were, working for a major studio and you could do it, like a movie like Waking Life, which was pretty inspirational to me. But then when Robert approached me about this project, he was actually really interested in finding a way to make it animated, both for the special effects and for the fact that we were sort of stuck in our homes during the pandemic, and how can you make a New York apartment look like a period home from the time period of yellow wallpaper. And so I told him that I was really interested in doing that. I'd like to return to it and to see if the animation working at home if the technology is caught up with us so that we can do it. So that's kind of it. I'm a little bit of a fanboy of the animators here in the room. I consider myself somebody who dabbles with cell shading, not really somebody who understands animation. So I'm very impressed with their work.
Looking forward to seeing that shortly. Alex.
Oh, I cannot call myself in any meaningful way an animator either, but my involvement with animation has always stemmed from how we can bring talented theater performers to life in new and exciting ways. So my background is as an architect, also doing a lot with emerging technology like virtual and augmented reality. And when I got to start exploring some real-time technologies like Unreal Engine, this is a piece of software that lends itself to so many different industries. There's all this going on with virtual production and shows like The Mandalorian, as well as games and other kinds of film. And my interest has always been in what can you do live at the theater level of what happens in an actual venue, like at Actors Theater of Louisville, but also what can you do in an entirely virtual venue. So my earliest animation experiences were what happens when we put someone in a VR headset and somehow try to track what their hands and head are doing and, interpolating that onto a body. Nowadays, like what we're doing with Actors Theater of Louisville for Christmas Carol, it's much more robust because we have Rococo suits and full body tracking with hands and face and all of that going onto a character that might not necessarily look like the actual actor who's performing that character. And then the result, is something that is quite remarkable and hopefully captures the spirit of what that performer is doing. So less so than an animator, I just think of myself as an enabler of, bringing performances to new mediums.
Thank you, Alex. Andy?
Well, I've got to echo kind of what everyone else is saying, that I can't really call myself an animator either. Usually the things that I make are static images that don't move at all. So that's why when I was approached for the Ali Summit project, I was really interested in it to work and collaborate with other creators to make my work come to life. So that was one of the really cool things that I was interested in the project.
Awesome. Can't wait to share the visuals with the folks. Yehuda.
I guess I'll break tradition and say that I definitely have been an animator my entire life. I was literally born into it. My dad, Ron Husband, was the first African-American animator that Walt Disney Studios ever hired. And so back in 72 or 74 he started. I grew up at the Walt Disney Studios, and so I've always ever wanted to do it. And it's actually interesting because it was animation that gave me my path to my second passion, which is theater. My dad always said that an animator is nothing more than an actor with a pencil. And even when I was working at Walt Disney Feature Animation, we had to take acting classes, things like that. And so my career went from Disney to college in Atlanta, Georgia, where I ended up after college working for a Cartoon Network, Turner Studios and Turner Broadcasting. Spent most of my career there until I left to do independent projects, which is where I sort of come in and found myself in a position to work with Actors Theater on Breast of Teresias, which was amazing.
Fantastic. Nick?
Yeah, I'm sort of a little bit similar, a little bit different. When I was a kid, was obsessed with Disney and wanted to be an animator, and remember going to Walt Disney Studios and just looking forward to that tour where you got to peek at the animators animating. I couldn't believe, what are they working on? How do you do this magic? But then when high school and college came along, it felt like you could either go down the art degree road, or like I was sort of a dilettante of a whole bunch of things at the time and came to theater sort of later. And had sort of forgotten about that until I was in my 20s, and I was in grad school studying theater, studying acting, and I picked up this program, this animation program, and started getting back into it after having gone full circle to the acting side and coming back to this thing that I loved when I was a kid. I was a real recluse, always drawing in my room and making little, flip books and stuff. But man, you can learn anything on the internet. So for many years, I just did it for me, just to learn, and then bit by bit, like got better and better, without like a goal in mind, and realized, oh my gosh, this is now actually something I can do, and I love to do it. And like acting and animation, but like you said, Yehuda, are the same thing, where we're coming at the same thing of storytelling, just from a different lens with a different set of tools. I remember being in class with some animators, and they would try and figure out like how do you tell the story of this gesture? Or you got to move this finger here, and then you got to move the hand, or whatever. And it's like, well, that is an animator's like metaphysical, like how do I manifest the physical thing of this thing, versus like the actor's just like, I got to figure out my objective and like do the thing. But they're all talking the same like essential storytelling language. So animator and actor, I would answer to both.
Spectacular. Well, these hyphenate roles that many of you share with these extraordinary kind of expertise in many different areas probably is no more eloquently expressed than through your work. So let's take a look at a trailer for The Yellow Wallpaper.
There's something strange about the house. I can feel it. This wallpaper has a kind of sub-pattern. I can see a strange, provoking, formless sort of figure. There are things in that paper that nobody knows but me, or ever will. Behind that outside pattern is a dim shape that gets clearer every day. I will follow that pointless pattern to some sort of conclusion.
Wow. That is so cool. Chris, can you just talk a little bit? It reminds me of a series I love called Undone on Amazon Prime. Can you talk a little bit about how you realized that, and who was that extraordinary actress in that performance?
It's kind of hilarious that I'm the one that's here talking. I should definitely have my wife with me. We created this together, she and I, and she did, almost as much work as me on the computer and the animation itself. She actually came up with the patterns for the wallpaper. She did a number of extraordinary things because she actually has a great eye for graphic design. I was inspired by a lot of films and TV shows. Undone was a real inspiration. I just loved it so much. Obviously, they had a little more at their disposal, both financially and sort of equipment-wise. And so I was kind of trying to figure out, like, how would this work? We were fortunate enough to be in a New York apartment. This was all shot during the lockdown, and fortunate enough that our New York apartment has some elements of that time period. I mean, it was built a little bit after that, but it still had a little bit of the feel of it. But for the most part, we needed to animate it in order to really make it look like 1890, if we were going to play with that. We had a lot of ideas about how to do that. And, fortunately, I had this brilliant actress in my house to use at my disposal. And so she was able to, play the lead role. And pretty much the whole story is from her perspective. You see bits and pieces of the husband, but that's about it. And so it was easy enough for me to play those. It was really a practice in improvisation, because Robert had originally approached me and said, here's kind of what I like. There's some filters and stuff that you can use. And he showed them to me. And my difficulty with a lot of that, although it was beautiful to look at, part of what happens when you impose things on film, because I love cinematography, but when you start to put things over top of it, filters and looks, it disconnects you from the heart, right? Everybody was talking about how important it is to get across intention and emotion and connection. And that's without question true. And when you start to put things over top of it, you impose on it and disconnect the audience from the heart of the matter. And one of the things that gets disconnected the most quickly is the eyes. The eyes are sort of our windows to the soul in cinematography, and you really need to connect with people through their eyes. That's how you love them and know them. You have to put light in them, and we have to see what they're thinking. And the more you put over top of it, the more you disconnect it from that. So I was trying to find out different ways of cell shading. If I was even if I painted it cell by cell myself, it obscured us from it, and that bothered me too much. So I did a bunch of looking around different animation techniques, and in the end, it really was improv, because I used, 4 different pieces of software, but also 4 different techniques over top of one another just to do that. So I used, I found ways to find the lines and the dimensions of the character. Then you have the shade inside that. So then I used, a different program to actually put the color on top of that. And then I used something to make the cartoon effect. I actually used one filter, and it always looked terrible. So I used the filter, and then I would reduce the filter, put the lines in, paint over top of it. So there was a number of different techniques I used, and it changed over time. Even watching the trailer, that was the first thing we did, was the trailer. And I watched the trailer now, I'm like, oh God, we got so much further along as we actually made the film, because we had to make the trailer so people would get excited about it. And you can actually tell in the course of the film when you watch it. Oh, please do watch it. I think it's really fun, if for no other reason, just to watch my wife act. But when you watch the film, you see as the techniques develop over time, because we did it in sequence. So it is kind of fun that way too. But it was definitely a practice of improvisation as we went.
That's extraordinary, Chris. And watching you move through that process with the kind of courage and adventurousness and commitment was extraordinary. Why don't we, you mentioned something about the light in the eyes, and we'll talk about what each of these projects are about a little bit more, but why don't we take a little look at a project that's in process, A Christmas Carol, which will have both a VR as well as in real life production, utilizing many of the same assets of motion capture. So let's take a look at some of that work.
We're currently in Actors Theater of Louisville's rehearsal room. We have been in the process of doing some motion capture work with both an actor kind of expressing through face and a couple of artists doing the physical body work. And we are combining those, experimenting, having the interrogation of how this story of Dickens actually can manifest in a full production, both in virtual reality and in real life.
I am the ghost of Christmas past.
Long past?
No, your past.
Your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps? Is that so much that he deserves this praise? What is the matter? Something, I think. My time grows short. Quick!
Wow. Alex, can you talk a little bit about what's being utilized there with the metahumans and all the incredible work you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm in the process of building out a new platform that is tailored for live performance. I've been involved in over a dozen virtual reality theater productions over the past few years, and I'm trying to take the lessons learned from that of what works and what doesn't, and now using Unreal Engine, which is a free real-time engine that anyone can download and get started with, starting to build out a toolbox with Actors Theater of Louisville being our first partner in this endeavor. And the idea is to use all these different features and tools that are primarily made for other industries, but then start to coalesce all that in together and build new tools that start to really tailor themselves towards live performance. So for example, what you saw there was MetaHumans. That's a fairly new, as of April, solution that Unreal Engine offers for free for anyone to go into a website, design your own character, bring it into Unreal Engine, and then you can animate it. You can do this with Rococo. You can do this with LiveLink Face, which is a free iOS app. You can do this with Xsense, all sorts of different tools. And so we're trying to simplify the process of everything that you'd normally be doing in Unreal Engine and just make it incredibly straightforward for anyone to get up and running with giving a performance and allowing other people to see it. So the audience version of the VR experience is going to be anyone who has a $300 VR headset or something like that they can get very up close to these incredible performances that are being recorded now over in Actors Theater of Louisville, but then also Scrooge in the VR version is going to be live. We have Ari Tara, who's been an incredible actor across a lot of different VR productions, playing Scrooge, interacting with all these characters and performances while all sorts of things are happening around everyone that can really only happen in a digital medium.
And if I don't have a $300 headset, would I be able to experience some part of this without that technology as well?
Yes, yeah. So the VR version is the most immersive version because you really feel like you're there and you get a sense of scale. But we do want this to be as accessible as possible. So all the rendering for this production is happening live on the cloud using very powerful computers that are elsewhere. And if you're in a VR headset, you basically have one computer reserved for you. But if you're not in a VR headset, then you can also access one of those computers with, a $200 Chromebook or your phone. and then also be able to move around in kind of an immersive theater way and pick whatever viewpoint you want. And then beyond that, kind of like for anyone who's watching this on YouTube or Facebook right now, we'll also have something of a cinematic live stream, not unlike what the Royal Shakespeare Company did for Midsummer Night's Dream a few months ago. And it should be a very accessible performance with a lot of different ways to experience it in various levels of interactivity and immersivity.
Wow, that's thrilling. We let me pivot over to the Ali Summit. It has already been released as an audio-visual experience where you can hear Idris Goodwin's play and look at the extraordinary artistry of Andy Perez's illustrations, but it'll soon be released on a VR platform. Let's take a look at a trailer for that.
1967, a number before the summer. 1967, a number before the summer. Hands and heat melting, Hendrix strings cascading, insanity falling, napalm rain, red frying wet jungles. 1967, a number before the summer.
Wow, that is spectacular. Andy, tell us a little bit about how you came to create what you created.
Well, all of the I created, I forget how many there were, maybe 10 or 12 characters that are full body like figures, and they're created with pieces of painted paper that then I've cut up and glued together. I can actually show you, like, this is an example of what one looks like not on a screen. And one thing I always think is cool whenever I make these like freestanding things is like how they look on the back. It's kind of like Frankenstein, all the kinds of crazy stuff. But so all these guys were exist on the screen and then also in that virtual world, which I think is really cool.
Spectacular. Did you come to that kind of visual art through graphic design, or has graphic design led you to that kind of work, or have they just been in conversation with each other?
That's a good question. They've been in conversation for a while. I think in college I studied illustration, and that's been sort of my main focus for a while. And then as I was, out in the world, I've been doing design and illustration and artwork and kind of all at the same time. It's all sort of always evolving and going.
What's the hardest part about creating work that has kind of mixed mediums like that?
I don't know what the hardest part is. Maybe just keeping it all, finding a place for it, keeping it all together, making the time to do it. Pretty much the same challenges that any art has.
And what's kind of the great joy or benefit of when you're working with materials like that, and then you finally realize 9 extraordinary, unique characterizations of some seminal figures like Muhammad Ali?
I mean, it's awesome. I don't know. I've got these little guys still in my studio, so it's really cool just to see them, and also to see them. I can't wait for the virtual reality one to come out. That's going to be so cool.
Thank you, Andy. Yehuda, why don't we take a little bit of a look at The Breast of Tiresias? That was a part of our COVID Classic compilation of one-act plays.
It's too much. Then sing night and day. Scratch it, scratch the itch, white black away. Then sing night and day. Then sing night and day.
Wow, Yehuda, can you talk a little bit about your engagement with and your initial impression of the idea of taking the first classic surrealist play and trying to figure out how to make it a short, animated short?
I can honestly say that without you as a part of that process, Robert, I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have been able to find my way through it, because when you first kind of showed me the script, I was like, what is going on in here? I wasn't really exactly sure. I remember really relying on you very heavily to like really understand what we were doing. I think when we first approached this, I kind of approached it as just kind of, okay, I'm going to animate this, and I just kind of very sort of narratively, kind of whatever the script says, this is what I'm going to do literally. And so I started doing the storyboards, and you were really kind of helping me pull out of this sort of the deeper meaning, because it really was something that I remember the first read, I was like, what is this? What is going on? And then really sort of taking it by, just really peeling back all the layers and saying, how do we incorporate all of this in both the character design, the set design, all of that, and you really treated it so very much like a theatrical process. I'm used to the way theater works, and I'm used to the way the animation works, and so and this was literally for me the first time of really really blending those two mediums as opposed to when I was usually an animator, I pull in all of my theatrical stuff, but usually when I'm dealing with my theater stuff, like there's a wall out. But this really was a very collaborative process where you really you kind of treated me less than an animator and more like an actor, and you were just saying like, all right, well, why are we doing this, and why is this character doing this, and what is this, and really nuancing and picking and doing the work that really actors tend to do and throughout rehearsals. And so a lot of our late night phone sessions where we were like talking about like reviewing footage and in progress was where I really started to understand what we were doing and what this meant and why we were doing this, especially against the backdrop of the social unrest that was going on in the world, and especially in Louisville, just a feet from your place. As we were working on this, it became really significant as far as just the content itself, and so I really wanted to pour that into it. And then we would get to a certain point, and I would review it, and you're like, it's missing something, and then you'd be like, okay, I want you to look up Missy Elliott videos, and we're gonna go all Missy Elliott on this sequence right here. And I was like, what are you kidding? But really this was so for me anyway. It was so it really did extend what I even understood animation could be, and theater, can be as animation. So it really, that process to me really came as we were doing it. It was a journey for me to do it, as opposed to, usually when I approach something, it's animation can really, especially commercial animation, can be extremely departmentalized and segmented, where, you don't do an ounce of anything over, per frame. It's completely edited and prescripted, but this was much more of a different process that felt so much more like theater than it did classic animation for me, technique wise and just approach wise. And so it really was very different for me. It's wonderful. It was eye opening for me.
This is just so interesting. You were being really generous, because I was like, you would send these versions, and I was like, that's amazing. How did you even do that? So like, I have the exact opposite memory of like you bringing all of this amazing realization of the process, and me being so new and such a novice and having no idea what animation could do. So this is really very powerful to hear you offer that, and that was your experience. That's very generous. Thank you. Nick, can you talk a bit about your work after we get to see a little snapshot of the trailer of When I Read My Daughter Rudyard Kipling? Here we go.
This book belonged to Dada, and he read it to me when I was your age. So I thought it might be fun to share with you.
You wanted to pass it on?
Yeah.
Even though it's full of holes?
I guess so. Should we continue?
Yes!
Man, I can't even describe how much I love this. How Charlie Brown-esque I kind of always thought this series was. Nick, can you just talk a little bit about the creative process of how you arrived at this?
Oh, sure. Like many animators, when I was a kid, I was obsessed with the Jungle Book and, Disney as a whole, but that was certainly a gateway into like what's possible. And then when I showed it to my daughter, she was 2 at the time. She loves cartoons. She's very, very, what's the word? When you're precocious. Um, and so I showed her the Jungle Book, and watching it, I was like, this is problematic as hell. Like, why are all these animals British? Like, anyway, so when you approached me to translate these or adapt these stories, I found myself thinking a lot about the stories we pass on and why, and we just sort of assumed that we must because they were totemic for us. But that step of investigation uh, really happens when you like make a decision to share this, and then are met with the conversation of like the current generation, which and all with everything going on in the world, it felt like this just sort of happened. I mean, I remember, Robert, you called me and you were like, "What do you think about adapting the story?" And I read it that night, and I was like, "This is so racist." But like, here's an idea that's sort of crazy, and to your so like grateful to you. The next day, I came in with that screenplay for the first episode, and you were like, "Do that," and I was like, "Are you sure I haven't upset the theater?" But like, because it was a big departure. But that question of what do we pass on and why, I think is ripe for exploration from the older generation to the younger and vice versa. Yeah, so it became a very exciting, especially like having a young daughter and like going through this every day. I mean, that character is very based on truth. That's my niece Morgan, who's doing the voice, and I of course am doing the dad. And yeah, it turned into something. It felt really special, and I'm eternally grateful for you giving such like a generous swath of free reign to like go into a hole and come back 4 to 6 weeks later with like, here's a couple episodes. Hope that's okay. There's actually 9 more episodes I didn't get to finish in the short time we had that I hope to get to one day. I've got all the recordings, so Morgan is frozen in time at 9 years old there. She's 11 now, wearing leather jackets. It's crazy. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Right. In order to try to get to the questions, I could not find my unmute. Thank you, Nick. And yeah, that was really exciting. So much of this is bringing back the kind of 2 public health crises that these were made out of, a reckoning with systemic racism and COVID, and the kind of isolation that we were under, and the questions we were asking and the things we were investigating gave us a chance to really reset and reanimate some ideas of ways that we could really have a larger conversation. So without further ado, I want to get to some of these great questions from our students. And one of them is, will we be able to participate in animation, and how can we get involved with that kind of acting? So that's for anyone on the panel who might want to share a thought or a question or offer an answer to that question.
I'll say something. As a kid now, or as a young person now versus a young person when I grew up, when I wanted to explore animation, I had to have my dad help me build a light box out of like plywood and saran wrap and plexiglass, go to Home Depot, all this stuff, just to have the possibility of tracing one image on another image, let alone trying to like figure out how to animate after that, But now, from my phone, I can download a free app where I can like start to experiment with making pictures move. It's such a magical thing when you like make the ball bounce and it looks like a ball. And so I would just encourage everybody on this, panel, watching this panel, who's interested in animation. You can just go do it right now. There's so many YouTube videos about like, just look at the 12 principles of animation and you'll find a bunch of amazing things. Just look, how do I animate a bouncing ball? And then just do it on your phone, or like grab a couple pieces of paper, like it's so easy to get started now. I'm so excited about what's going to come out of a generation that has had access to technology in a way that people of like previous generations have not. So yes, you can do it. It's far easier than it ever was before. rock and roll.
Anyone else?
I'll just mention, going back to Unreal Engine. Unreal Engine 5 is a new release that is currently in early access that's coming out in earnest, probably in, let's say, 6 months or so. But there's a new animation tool in there called Control Rig, which is remarkable for keyframe animation. If you actually want to lerp between different kinds of animation states, it's really wonderful. Now that's a little different from most of the animation I'm involved with, which is, actors giving a performance and then maybe cleaning it up a little bit. But even that is something that is becoming more and more accessible. You can now start to use things like webcams. There's companies like Radical and a few others on the market that I'm not thinking of at the moment, where literally just from a camera like your phone, you can start to give some kind of performance, and that can translate into motion capture data that can be used in Unreal Engine or Unity or a number of other programs. And then, of course, yes, with VR, whether you have just a headset and some controllers or Vive pucks, there's all sorts of different ways to do it. That performance can be performed live or recorded, and then you can do other things with it. So, yeah, I mean, just to echo what Nick was saying, there's so many tools and they're growing every day. So it's a wonderful time for even someone who has never taken a class but just wants to try it out to get started just by watching a couple YouTube videos.
There was one question in the chat just asking, what apps do you use to animate, if any of you actually use apps or have apps that you think would be a great starter to get going on something like this?
I'll jump in on both that and just piggybacking off of the last question, which about the acting. I have voice directed for animation quite a few people who do that only as a living and only do like animation or voiceover acting, like Tess McNeil and Tom Kenny. But by and large, most of the people that I've ever voice acted and used for my animation projects have been just actors, actors who do either cinematic acting or stage acting, and a lot of stage actors actually, and so I would approach it that way. So it's not just like, if I want to be, do voice acting for animation, that's the goal would be just to become an actor and really throw yourself into theater and acting, and bring all that, even the physicality, you want to try to put that into your voice acting. And just as far as what I use for animation, I try to always start out at do something traditionally on paper, and that's usually my the storyboarding process, just so that there's something that's physical that's not digital, and everything else after that is digital. And that's specifically for Breast of Tiresias. I use Adobe Animate to do the animation, and a combination of Photoshop and Cinema 4D to make the backgrounds and the set pieces, and then Adobe After Effects to composite it all and export it finally.
Fantastic.
And there's also, just to throw out other software out there, Procreate has some great ability to do frame by frame, hand-drawn stuff, or even like image moving stuff. And I use this program called Moho or Moho Pro, which is a great 2D like drawing and animating program that I learned everything on. It used to be called Anime Studio, but anyway, and there's a bunch out there. Flipbook, there's many things. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for that, gentlemen. There was a question also. What was the takeaway you wanted the audience to receive from the Breast of Tiresias? And I would just say, from my perspective as someone who was working on the translation and adaptation and directing, it was simply, like all work, you hope that it creates a conversation and that people tell you what they got from it more than what I might intend, that you're trying to be as true to some of the impulses of that creative artist, what you imagined that they were expressing, and try to realize that as fully so that people can have their own experience about what they got from it. I think maybe surrealist work, as much as anything, really gives people that opportunity to place themselves in the interpreter's seat. Anything from you, Yehuda, on that?
I would echo that, because literally the conversations that you and I had while working on this were the kind of conversations that I hope that people, that they start talking about feminism, and they start talking about patriarchy, and they start talking about colonialism and its effects. All that is so, really, it's in there. Even like some of the nuances that you directed me to put in there, things that I didn't see going into the script, and then once they were brought out, like the American flag that the Parisian tied around his waist, and all of the things that and I was like, I storyboarded it, but I didn't understand it. And you were like, this is what I think why that's in there. And we had these like hours long conversation, and that's kind of what I hope people come away. So exactly, instead of what do I hope that people come away, what my question would be, what did you get out of it? And if you just look at it and think about it, and just really go to town, I really think it's so thought provoking, and so quote unquote deep. And that sounds, and that's not me, that's Apollinaire. And so that's, that's kind of what I would say about it. Yeah.
There's some great links in the chat from Alex and Nick. Also, if you want a good 12 Principles animation video, as Nick said, here's some resources to kind of look for that. Now I just want to take a moment, because I think it's pretty rare that animators and creators have a chance to ask questions themselves. We'll keep an eye on the chat if there are more coming in. But what are the kind of things that inspire you about each other's work, or things that intrigue you that you're seeing about their work and provoke questions creatively for you?
I, for one, I'm sort of endlessly fascinated right now with VR and sort of where it might take us. And so the work that Alex is doing right now is really, really intriguing to me. I'd love for him to talk a little bit about that, because the thing that I think is very cool, because I'm a theater artist as well, as much as I love the camera, I love the stage. And this project that you're working on has a live element to it, which I think is very interesting for this sort of VR stuff. Will you talk a little bit about that? Because that kind of blows my mind.
Yeah, so we were fortunate to start studying what makes a live virtual performance work starting back in 2018. We were working with Philip Rosedale, who created Second Life and High Fidelity, which was a social VR platform. And we were looking at different, avatars. What happens when you try to track the entire body versus what if you do something with like larval masks and you just have a very simple mask, and then maybe you're just tracking hands and feet, and see what your mind can do for the rest of the body. And we looked at different environments, more proscenium stage styles versus more immersive theater styles. And what happens if you, force the audience to be muted the entire time? Well, that allows the performers to concentrate better, but then also you never get to hear like laughter or a gasp or anything like that. So there's all these tools when you're working in a digital environment, playing with scale and flying and swapping what your body looks like in an instant. But then there's also issues that you just would never run into in a real performance, like dealing with latency. You typically don't have an actor on stage like start to move their mouth and then you don't hear what they're saying for 5 seconds. That is a real issue. So for example, with Christmas Carol, we're trying to figure out, how do we take all these different streams of data for motion capture and sound and face data and body data and make sure that's all synced up and really feels immediate and like you're really there as part of the performance. Creating a platform now is also very interesting, because typically a lot of the productions that have been created over the past couple years are using social VR platforms like VR Chat and AltSpace and Mozilla Hubs, which are primarily geared towards people in an equal opportunity kind of context where anyone can pick their own avatar, and I can be Pikachu and you can be the Iron Giant and be 30 feet tall. And if we're all sitting in a theater show together, maybe that's a little bit distracting if a bunch of people are just trying to focus on the performers. So with Heaven U, this platform we're building, we're trying to put 95% of the computational resources toward the actual performers, and then keep the audience very simplified by default. Like, this is up in the air, but for example, with Christmas Carol, we might keep most of the audience members as like snowflakes, just kind of like falling gently alongside other snowflakes, and you can control where you're going and all that. But that means that you're kind of part of the environment and you have some agency in what you're looking at, but you're never going to be distracting to the other audience members. And the live actor can also still get a sense of where everyone is. One also interesting challenge is for a virtual reality performer, do you put them in virtual reality? Because if you do, they get to feel much more immersed in the environment, and they get to have an easier time making eye contact with the other actors or the other performances, or even with the audience members, if they feel like there's a cluster of audience members that are really engaged for whatever reason, whatever expressive tools we might give the audience to glow or pulse or something, that's really great. But if an actor is inside a virtual reality headset, then we can't capture as much of their face. We can do something basic with eye tracking and maybe lip tracking, but all the subtleties of, little face twitches and eyebrows and all of that starts to get lost. So, you can use like a helmet with a phone or a GoPro camera kind of sticking out. And that does a wonderful job of capturing face, which is what Actors Theater of Louisville is doing with their whole Rococo setup. But in that case, it's a little bit more difficult to be engaged in the environment. So it's a very interesting challenge for an actor, especially if you start to go into a whole other conversation, which is what happens when you're playing to a hybrid audience where you have people right in front of you and also a virtual audience that is coming in from all over the world. And there's so many interesting challenges that and none of them are solved. These are all exciting issues that we're all tackling together, and it's a wonderful time to be playing in the sandbox.
Other questions for each other or things we'd love to respond to?
There's so much I could say and ask of all of you right now. I'm going to ask Yehuda, just because as a fellow like 2D rigger, you have like such great character design. And I noticed there's just like so many assets that you created and like rigged up. And I was wondering, as I have gotten into like doing animation under the auspices of a theater, I was just wondering how the process of rehearsal was different or affected you from storyboard to creation, and how you mitigated the difficulties of like in the pipeline world. It's like everything is figured out before you animate. Do you know what I mean? And like, I'm curious about what that journey was like for you with this like very ambitious piece that looks still so cool. I'm like, how did you find the time to do all that?
It was extremely ambitious, and it was a lot of late nights and a lot of just working, weekends and throughout, but it was really a labor of love, and I can definitely say that it evolved while we were doing it. Like I said before, it was like, I would, there was something that might be in the script and I would animate it happening, but I would, because it was so surrealistic, I didn't really, and I think, Robert knew this, that I didn't really get what I was doing. I did it, but I didn't know. And so he was like, why is he doing it? And when did he do that? Or when did she do that? And what's her, and so, and even to the idea of having this character that was kind of based on Rachel Dolezal and having to go and really read up on her and understanding what's going on, and then making this character look like that and sort of serve that purpose. There was so much that was happening, so that it wasn't in the storyboards, but and it was usually, from a storyboard for the storyboard reel, what you get is just that, and the animation is just filling that in. But for us, the process was definitely a lot more evolutionary during the process, and so that's why I said it was so different than anything else I'd ever done or approached. Because, like I said, it's always really, regimented by the frame, from the beginning to the end. But for us, it was a lot of being experimental in what we were doing and going back and saying, this is really sort of do that. So as far as the character design and all of that, that was a process too, where I would sort of read the script and see what they looked like in my head, and then take that to Robert, and he would, we would go back and forth about that. Sometimes I nailed it, sometimes I didn't quite get it, and that kind of thing. So it was really that kind of a process, but it was all rolled up in one person. So usually that's very departmental. Like my father, who worked for Disney for 48 years, he did like one thing. He was a character animator. He did mostly villains, and he just did what do you call it? Key drawings, and there are people who make a living doing nothing but in betweens, and people who do. And I have a friend, Steve Starr, who is living just like in betweening smoke and water, and that's it. That's all he did his entire career. So, so this was, not being departmentalized and doing all of it, and even to the point where Robert was like, "All right, so I'm gonna have you sing. You're gonna record, or this chick is gonna rap." And I was like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, you can do it." And so it really was just like this journey, this process of like, what can we do? What does this mean? And if we do it and we realize that this is not, it means something else, then we redo it. And so that's a luxury that everyone doesn't always have. But like I said, that was the part of this that was much more like theater than it was, sort of animation. And so it was a very sort of atypical, just kind of a dream project for me. But yeah, it was very ambitious, and it took a lot of time, especially for all those details. Yeah.
Yehuda, that's thank you for that, and thank you for the question. The Actors Theater of Louisville really is committed as a transmedia arts and culture organization, a social enterprise, to really being a lab for innovations in form and content, and really that was really born out of the pandemic period here, where we really got the chance to have iterative processes and realizing the work, and kind of working with the operating assumption that what's going to creatively come out of that would be really compelling and something that people would feel responsive to. So we have been so grateful to all of you for your gamesmanship and willingness to jump in to the deep end of the pool of that process with this work, because we really feel that and I think the work shows that what extraordinary creativity has kind of come out of it, and how we're hoping that that'll continue. There was another question in the chat, and I think it's you spoke to it a little bit, Yehuda. Are there processes about Disney animation or that form that inspire, or things that you find that in your own work you challenge or adopt? I know you work for the Cartoon Network. Are there practices that kind of resonate for you, and those that you continue to think about evolving and exploring in different ways?
That was one of the things I think that was so different from my time at Disney than my time at Cartoon Network, where at Disney, because it is such a huge behemoth of production and output, and just almost a century of sort of formula. Cartoon Network was a place where I was able to do a lot more it wasn't as departmentalized, so I was able to do a lot more. And so, as opposed to just being someone who just did, animation or just did the keys, I was able to do storyboarding as well. Because they have in Disney, there's a whole different department for storyboarding, and there's a different department for character design. There's a different department for this and for that, for in-betweening, for just all different things. And I also wanted to when I was at Disney, the best thing that I ever did was sort of stay after work all the time in the ink and paint department and teach myself how to composite, because a lot of animators don't know how to do all of that. The production side of the art, they just do the art side, but not the sort of the production side and the editing side. And so that's one of the strengths that I sort of had, and then kind of took that to the Cartoon Network and kind of revolutionized the way that we did that at least my department did stuff there, and putting a lot more of that the editing into the hands of the actual animators. And so that was something that was different, and that I have kept and which is why I was able to do to the next question, being able to do so much of what we did. And you were like, I wanted to look like this one sequence where he was going to sing, and you wanted it to be like a Missy Elliott video, and I was like, I have no idea how to do that, so let me Google. And that's like came back to it. It's like, all right, here, I did it. Let's look at this, and so it was so iterative, like you said, and experimental. But yeah, so I obviously there's a probably a lot of Disney in me, but also the things that I grew up being impressed with, like things like Robotech and just Thundercats and things that I grew up watching and loving and wanting to draw as well. A lot of anime, and so people have always said that my personal style is a mix between Disney and anime, and so it's kind of like that's what I like to do, especially even the outlines, so that I'm not using black outlines, but I'm using what's called self-inked outlines for the character so that it blends in and just has a little bit of a sense. And then I do a little bit of shading, or basically it's a choker mat to give it a little bit more volume and that kind of a thing. And so yeah, so there are little things that I've learned, but it's pretty much a very much my style that I was able to sort of perfect on my own, as opposed to the sort of the real regimen, because obviously in animation is very labor intensive and therefore very expensive, and so it's really difficult to do things like we were able to do, to be so iterative and play around with it and change our minds and really dig and even after we had come up with what we were gonna what we had, and so. That's kind of what was unique about this process and this project, that everyone doesn't have the luxury of doing, of being being able to play so much like we did, and so that was very unique about this experience.
Before we wrap up, let me just ask, what are the kind of things in animation and in your work that really excite you about what's happening in the future? And what are the projects that you're working on now that really are inspiring you and taking your time at this moment?
I'll jump in.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, I feel like there's actually so much amazing animation happening right now. I know the pandemic has sort of forced people into their rooms, and creative spirits are like, well, what can I do in my room? And a lot of people who were into this craft are going deeper into it, and a lot of people who wanted to be into this craft are learning about it. And there's like almost like too much to consume now, which is very exciting. So yeah, I'm excited to see like how this trend continues. There's just so many like great movies coming out of so many studios that aren't just Disney and Pixar, and so many TV shows. I saw Central Park the other day for the first time on Apple. I'm like, this is amazing, and personally still tinkering away, any creative person, you're always working on something. I'm working on a music-based project right now about this ancient Indian epic, the Ramayana, another story I want to pass on to my daughter. I'm going to do it through this series of this trilogy of concept records, like you do. But anyway, so that's what I'm working on right now.
I guess I'll jump in. I'm sort of fascinated right now about the connection, as I brought up before, the connection between things that are live and things that are digital. So you're having this sort of really interesting overlap. I'm doing a lot of work with a number of theaters right now on their projects, and that has gotten me very excited. This idea that there is a live element, and what that live element means. Is it live in VR? Is it live on camera, or is it live in person on camera and in VR? So a lot of what entertainment can do, and because a lot of theaters during the pandemic, because they couldn't do live productions, had to sort of dip into this well. There's very few places anywhere that have done it as successfully as Actors Theater of Louisville, but there is a number of people that are trying to dip into that, and I think it's really interesting component of storytelling and how that mixed media can work. And that is sort of where I'm working on a number of different projects that I can't talk about exactly right now, but for different theaters. And I'm excited by that, this idea of live element mixing with the digital.
Yeah, and kind of on that note, it's really fun how as this technology evolves, there's still certain core principles that remain, throughout all of this, going back into the 1930s all the way through now. And like as a kid, I loved watching the second disc, of a DVD or whatever that would show you all the behind the scenes stuff of how an animated film is put together. And I loved watching that process of a sketch and storyboarding, and then I don't know the proper terminology, but then you see a whole sequence play out and it's still kind of sketchy, and you start to see it colored and get filled in. And so the version of that I get to participate in, which is so wonderful, is to see, you know, an actor give a performance and it's as like a mannequin or like a test avatar. And then that starts to get filled out and there starts to be maybe a character that's designed, and then there's clothing added, and suddenly you have real-time cloth simulation. And then suddenly you're going into VR and suddenly it's come alive off the screen and you're 2 inches from it and you're experiencing all these things that make it feel more theatrical than what you would normally get to do. So that's all incredibly thrilling to me. And each layer of that design process is so wonderful. And all I'm looking forward to is, you know, taking everything we do with this Christmas Carol production coming up in mid-December, taking the lessons from that, gathering as much knowledge and feedback as possible, and then going right on to other productions and continuing to refine and improve these techniques and create a toolbox that's as intuitive as possible for artists everywhere.
Yeah, this Christmas Carol's lab production with 4 sharings, exploring the idea of old media and new media, Dickensian recital, intersecting with motion capture. And we're really excited about what we're getting to learn, what we're already learning, and what that might mean for a fuller production in the fall of 22 and winter of 22. Very exciting. What are you up to, Andy and Yehuda?
I'm continuing to do all kinds of artwork and design work, and really after working with the Ollie Summit and now talking to all you guys, I'm thinking like I need to start making things move. Like, I mean, it sounds like so easy, so I need to figure it out.
I would say that I'm really inspired, especially like what Alex was saying about how interactive animation is becoming, and I'm also can kind of piggyback on what Nick said about how accessible animation is becoming to people, especially lay people, so that a lot more different stories are able to be made. Voices are being out there. Personally, I am actually doing a lot more theater, animation for theater, which interestingly enough, I was completely against before I got involved with Robert and Actors Theater. I was just like total snob. I was like, no, even though we can't get on stages, I'm not doing animation. Animation is not theater, and theater is not animation, and never the twain shall meet. And it was Robert who really, like, literally, I said yes to this because I really wanted to work with Robert, to be a fanboy. But through that process, like my eyes were like literally open. I'm like, this is really, there's so much of this process that is like, all of my life, I had no idea that there was so much of the actual process that can be in theater production if you sort of step back and let that be the process. And so that's what we're doing. I'm doing, and even to the point of the current project I'm working on, it's for Shema Theater Group, and making the actors memorize their lines, and so that, and then the recording will be live in one take, and so that just like in live theater, if you mess up, you're going to mess up. That's going to be recorded and animated, and so really learning to really sort of extend this process and really get deep into this, which was inspired by COVID, and now that COVID is on the way out, Lord willing, that will. I still want to continue to do this and keep this a part of the theater process. It really was a wonderful just awakening for me. So it's great.
Nick, you put some great stuff in the chat. Do you want to talk about Judy's question there about the lack of female representation in the field and some resources around Pearl?
Yeah, definitely. It's a super real thing. The underrepresentation of females in animation, you see it across the board, and you're not the only person to notice it. There's some resources or some things I've come across. There was a great episode of Inside Pixar where there's a woman who's a software engineer at Pixar dealing with tools to help Pixar like be more mindful about like even like minor characters. She started on like Cars 2 or 3. She came to the Supers and was like, do you realize how many of the minor characters just happen to be male for no good reason? And they were like, I never like thought of that. And it's like the first step to change is the awareness of the people in power being shifted. And so there are very smart people who are aware of this and working on it. And it's important to always still ask, why aren't we there yet? So that was a great episode dealing with this question. There's this animated short card called Pearl This Pixar short, it's about this ball of yarn who goes to work at a big corporate bro agency. It's really funny and sweet and troubling, but like it's her dealing with what it was like to be an animator, a female animator in a male-dominated industry, and feeling like, how do I like fit in without losing myself? And then I just, in the world of YouTube tutorials, there's this animator this French female animator who I came back to over and over again. She has all these tutorials about all kinds of animation principles, and she works in 3D, but they apply to 2D or pencil and paper or whatever, whatever your medium, or puppets. Andy, I'm so blown away by those practicals, those puppets. They're amazing. Yeah, those are just some things that question invoked in me, Judy.
And we should probably also be very clear that the lack of representation of women in this field was strategic and on purpose. And it was patriarchy, and it was people like the Disney company who literally turned women away who wanted to do it, who were just as talented as the men, and that's always been the case. And so the women who are sort of making their way, and so it's about access, and it's never been about talent. It's always been about access.
I made them like they were the painters back in the day, right?
The ink and paint girls. If a woman, an artist, applied to be an animator at Disney in the very beginning, up until at least like maybe 50s or 60s, they were turned away. They were told, "We don't admit men. We don't admit women to animators." So they were able to be. They were painters, and so and that kind of thing. And so I mean, they course corrected and done a lot of that, in the last decades and whatnot. But it's because of that systematic holding back that discrepancy is there, and that it's taking so long to try to make up the gap because of it was absolutely on purpose. And so it was discrimination, plain and simple, outright, not just at Disney, but at other places too. Cartoon Network, Hanna-Barbera, which is what Cartoon Network started out as, things like that. And so make no mistake that was absolutely on purpose, and it's a wrong that's just now being righted in the last decade or so. A lot of ground to cover on that.
Did you all have heroes growing up that you felt reflected your experience in the fields that you're engaged in and the work that you're doing now?
I'll just put out there, no, like not that represented me. There were people I loved and whose work I really admired, of course, but it wasn't until I was a grown up that I was like, I was making it was a cartoon or a comic or something, and I made it, and it was about me and my brother, but still, like, the character was white. And I had this moment where I was like, I've just never seen anybody that looked like me who was an animated character, and it's all imaginary. Like, it's such a funny thing when you like when the blinders come off, it's like, wow. So I feel like there's certainly heroes I admired, but like I'm very happy to look around and see, like, Riz Ahmed being nominated for an Oscar, and have, like, Red Barath tearing up the, like, indie music circuit. Like, although there's such a big swath of stuff that has inspired me as a person, it's nice to see the envelope continuing to expand.
Is there work that inspires you of any of the new things from Big Mouth to Soul, or innovations that you're seeing in the field that are noteworthy, that maybe the novice like myself wouldn't notice is happening right under my nose?
I'll say that I probably have watched Luca by Pixar every single day since it's come out. It's not just because my 2-year-old daughter loves it, but I love it. It's pretty amazing. Not everything that comes out of that studio blows me away, but that does story-wise, as well as just what they're doing. And so a lot of there's a lot of different voices that are out there, especially because the platforms are becoming more accessible, as well as the media. The platforms are like, streaming services, things like that. There's so many different areas to get stuff, get content out there, as opposed to the old sort of Hollywood release, theatrical, cinematic release, or network television series thing that was the only other way to get things out there in the past. And so I would encourage, especially people who are doing independent work and shorts and just getting them out there and getting them seen in film festivals and things like that. Same way with Actors is doing with Breast of Tiresias. They're submitting it to film festivals. It's in at least 4 different festivals now. Getting seen and getting it out there, just that kind of exposure is really exciting and really cool.
I'm happy to mention a few of the more, let's say, technical pieces out there that, by the very nature of what they require, not as many people are seeing them. But I'll start with probably the most accessible one. There was a series called Google Spotlight Stories, which were all of these 360-degree animations. The first one I saw that just absolutely wrecked me was called Pearl, P-E-A-R-L, not P-U-R-L, like the piece that Nick was describing. But it's very interesting to see any film that's done in 360 and done well, because it's very challenging. Like, how do you guide the eye? How do you frame anything in 360 and really tell a story where you're not just constantly wondering what's happening behind you? So that whole series is wonderful. There's another one in there called Age of Sail. And then I've also really loved some animated pieces that have dealt with, let's say, AI, for example. So there's an incredible piece called Wolves in the Walls, based on a Neil Gaiman story that was done by Fable Studios and Third Rail Productions, who of course did Then She Fell. And there's a character, an animated character in there that my kids basically think is their best friend. Everything from how she's animated to how she responds to you is so well done, and I'm totally blown away by it. That does require a proper VR headset. So does another piece I'll mention called Dear Angelica, which is almost the opposite, where instead of like constantly having this interaction with a very lifelike, believable, animated, stylized character, in Dear Angelica, it's a series of beautiful sketches. And so it's almost like, like these still art pieces where you only are getting a piece every, 5 seconds to 1 minute. And there's so much of a story being told with each of those drawings, and that drawing is happening all around you. And I love seeing how that kind of stuff is working. There's a program called Tilt Brush. There's a program called Quill, which is wonderful for anyone who can access a VR headset to get started drawing and experiencing what that's like. Quill has an incredibly robust animation workflow as well. So yeah, check that out if you can.
Any particular work that's inspiring you these days, Chris or Andy? Or artists themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of interested in lots of things. I mean, the sort of long format of television now is so great. You can now you can make a 19-hour feature film, which makes it, and people will watch it, which makes me very happy. So yeah, and I'm sort of I think Yellow Wallpaper got me started on sort of the genre of horror and why sort of gothic horror has a resonance, and it has its resonance right now in our present world in interesting ways, and it tells a lot of stories. So I love that. I'm watching Black Mass right now, which is really interesting. But there's an animator, a guy named Don Hertzfeld. I don't know, and I'll watch anything he does, and he's kind of inspirational to me. But the reason that he affects me so much, and it has to do a little bit with what Alex was talking about with VR and the way you sort of break out in live. And Don Hertzfeld many years ago was able to put together sort of this weird immersive feel to animated shorts, where suddenly you felt like, oh, he's breaking the wall and the characters are talking to me and they're coming out of the screen, and it was very upsetting and very wonderful. So like, he's always my inspiration because somehow he connects that.
Well, again, I mean, I'm really inspired just by being in this group today. This is, really cool. Just hearing that so many different things everybody's talking about. We're coming at sort of the same thing in so many different ways, and I think that's just really cool to get this group together and explore what everybody's doing is awesome.
Here. Well, as we're wrapping up, I just want to remind people of the extraordinary work Alex Coulombe is working on, Fifth Third Bank's A Christmas Carol Ghost Story, IRL, the in real life production, as well as A Christmas Carol Scrooge's Ghost Encounter live in VR that'll be coming out in December. Andy Perez, Ali Summit is currently available in audio visual and also soon to be offered in a VR platform. Yehuda Jai Husbands, The Breast of Teresi is currently in film festivals like the New Line, New Orleans Second Line Film Festival, along with the Yellow Wallpaper, the Paris, I'm going to forget, a festival in Paris and one in Atlanta as well. Monik Choksi's extraordinary When I Read My Daughter, Rudyard Kipling. And just, we are so proud to be able to share you gentlemen's extraordinary work. I just want to leave the last word. Thank you. The Paris Lift Off Festival is the festival that eluded me. But we are just really grateful to you gentlemen for your extraordinary work and for your willingness to come and be in conversation with us and our beloved students at JCPS and our audience and stakeholders who've tuned in. We want to thank you all. And any final words before we sign off?
One that came to mind, just in terms of inspiration, especially for all the parents out there, but also for all the kids. There's this show called Bluey, which is amazing and a real testament to storytelling on every level. They're all 8 minutes long, and my daughter, my wife, and I all laugh at the same time, and my wife and I cry like 50% of the episodes, like right at the end. Like the amount of storytelling that you can like squeeze into 6-7 minutes, you know, besides the like wonderful, fun, beautiful animation. Like I feel like Bluey is sort of a diamond in the rough for like taught script writing, storytelling, and life lessons in animation and all that stuff. My daughter would be proud I threw that out.
Brilliant.
I can't tell you how very privileged I feel to be in this group of people. This is pretty extraordinary folks here, and just being on the screen is pretty cool.
Thank you.
I would just say too, especially because we have students who are listening, just do it, just experiment and just get out there and do it. When I was younger, if I didn't grow up with YouTube, and if I had, I would have been doing feature-length films like by the time I was 10. You guys have so much access, and there's so much out there, as well as just, you know, don't be afraid to mess up. My dad always says keep a sketchbook and drawing every day for those of you who draw, but then also, when I was growing up, my father was kind of a perfectionist, and he wouldn't teach me how to animate. And so it wasn't until I was much older, almost an adult, that he would even let me try out some things. And so I had to do it on my own. So just do it. I just say, just do it. You know, draw from flip books to whatever you can get your hands on digitally. Just do it.
Amen to that.
And just echoing that, like, you know, find a story you want to tell. It can be something really simple. Start with something that's going to be a minute long. I struggled with a lot of different things I was trying to learn as a kid because I felt like I needed to, like, if I started learning guitar, you know, it was like, oh, I have to learn scales first, and I have to do everything in the proper music theory way. And then someone was like, hey, can we just play this one song together? And it's like, oh, I guess I'll learn that song. And the same thing happening with coding. Like, I didn't want to learn how to code, but then it was like, well, I need to solve a specific problem, so maybe I can solve that specific problem. And then with all these new animation tools, similarly, often, you know, at least for my learning style, and I'm sure for many of the people listening, you're going to learn best if you're trying to create a particular piece of art and you're solving problems along the way to make that happen. So try not to keep everything too abstract, make a thing, and then accept that the first couple times it probably won't reach the level of quality you were hoping for, but that's okay. You just keep going. You learn from each one, and it, before you know it, it becomes something pretty amazing.
Great words of wisdom.
Just piggybacking off that, I had a teacher say something to me once. She was like, write down a list of things you wish you really knew how to do 5 years from now and 10 years from now. And people will put like, oh, play piano, play guitar, whatever. And then you sort of like chart out what are the steps I would take in the, like to do that. What 10 years from now would I say, oh, I wish I had done this. And then you're like, well, time travel, now it's now. And 10 years from now is still 10 years away. So you don't have to be good at something Now, if you want to do it, say, I want to be good at this 10 years from now. And then it's sort of freeing, like, well, I can just like muck around on some scales. There's no point to it. There's no like judge. It doesn't have to be good or bad. I can draw whatever I want to draw. Nobody's paying me to do it. You know, you have the freedom to be as forward thinking as you want. And the more forward thinking you are, the more pressure you will relieve of yourself from feeling you have to be good at any moment, or judging yourself based on your like taste, which is further along than your skill at any point in your life. And may that always be true.
Thank you, gentlemen. We are so grateful to you and to our sponsor, UPS, for making this event possible. Thanks to all the students that tuned in and all of our stakeholders, constituents, fans, and family. We are very grateful to you for supporting actors and these extraordinary artists lending their extraordinary talents to us. Thanks, gentlemen. We'll see everybody on the next event. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.